So this session's called Stuff Happens, and stuff does happen on the trail, and you just have to be prepared to face the different things that happen to you. And I think if you kind of, and I've got to just step back a second actually to, you know, when I was finishing off the mind game of the hiking, the most important thing, which I just had a total blank on, I intended to say, was talk to me on the approach trail when I first went in 2014. And my attitude when I first went on this hike was I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't, my expectations, you know, I had to manage my own expectations. I thought it would be exciting. I didn't know if it was going to work out for me, but I was concerned with the prospect of being in the woods forever. You know, I thought I was going to be out in the woods. But this guy said to me, and I've said this on the podcast before, some of you may have heard it, if you treat a through hike like 3, 4 and 5 day hikes between stops in town, then you will have the right attitude towards the hike. So he agrees with me. The dog agrees with me definitely. Because if you look at it that way, then it becomes short 2, 3, 4, 5 day hikes, and it makes it much more manageable. And my mindset completely flipped that day. I thought to myself, well, that makes so much sense. So when you start hiking, start thinking about it that way. You know, you're going to go into town, not all the time, but you'll go into town and you'll think, well, that was a nice 3 or 4 day hike, and then you do another 3 or 4 day hike the next day. It's worth thinking about. This is Stuff Happens, and stuff does happen. The bubble. Let's talk about the bubble first off. This is various thoughts I had about this. When you start the hike in the peak season, which is likely to be March, early to mid-March, as many as 50 people start each day.
So firm nose, firm. No, firm. Sorry.
And if 50 people are starting each day, and if 45 of those are only doing 8 or 9 miles,
That's ouch.
you know you're not helping with the audio here, dog. When that happens, you get 45 people in the very first shelter and in the surrounding areas. What they have done for those early shelters, they've actually prepared some of the ground for some flatter spots all around those shelters. That's really helpful to know, because you know you're going to turn up and there will be tons of people there. You obviously have to find that flat spot. That is the downside of the bubble. There are just so many darn people around you all the time. Not when you're hiking, but in the shelter, everybody wants to get to that first shelter and the second shelter. And it's like a zoo, like an absolute zoo there. However, it does start to thin out soon after that. So you just have to look at the bubble as something you have to kind of get through. There is no getting around it. People will be starting all the way through March, and apparently they're still talking now record numbers next year registering for their hikes already. So if that is the case, those numbers are going to be large again. But part of the wonderful part of this trip is still going to be the community you meet anyway. And all of you, when you finish it, whether you do a long distance section hike or you do a through hike or whatever you're going to do, you'll all come back and I'll ask you on the show and you'll tell me that it was the community and the people that you met on the trail that really you loved about the trail. You may love the views, you may love the solitude, you may love all sorts of different things out there, but it'll be the community. So while there's a bubble there, within that bubble, you may find one of your best friends for the rest of your life. So just be aware that it exists, and everybody is nervous about their hike in the first few days anyway. And because they are nervous about it, they may do things they wouldn't otherwise do. Give people a little bit of latitude, and you'll find that people tend to behave themselves far more than they might otherwise. As far as starting early is concerned, and I started February 2nd time, it was way too early for me because I don't like the cold that much. And it was darn cold. You know, the Georgia Mountains, bearing in mind that for each 1,000 feet up you go, the temperature goes down apparently about 3 degrees. So it may be not too bad in the town, and then 4,000, 5,000 feet up when you get to the Smokies, you're 15 degrees cooler. And it does get cold. It gets very cold in the Smokies, still as late as March. You get snow as April rather. You still get snow in April, and it can be tough to take. So that's a downside of going early. The great side of going early is that you see beautiful flowers later down the trip. You also don't have to suffer so much with the cold weather in New Hampshire and Maine, because towards the end, I finished in September first time, end of September, it was freezing in Maine at the end. So you've got to decide what works for you in terms of your start, and also obviously your circumstances. Your circumstances will dictate when you go. Starting late, traditionally the start date for the Appalachian Trail used to be the 1st of April every year. Most people, April was the time to go, and people would finish in October, 6-month hike, and that was all good. I've noticed this year, several of my guests have come on recently. They've started in mid to late April, and they've still got there in September, October. So that's not a bad time to start. You miss all that cold weather, and it may be worth thinking about an April start for some people. NOBO and SOBO, everybody who listens to my show knows I will never go any other way than NOBO, because, you know, I just can't imagine hiking up Katahdin as your approach trail. I mean, it would just be horrendous. So to me, yeah, it is definitely a no-go as far as I'm concerned. And as far as this being called Stuff Happens, I know a lot of people prepare everything in minute detail. They prepare spreadsheets and they say where they're going to be on day 3 and day 100 and day 150. Most people will lose where they are on their spreadsheet within about 2 days, because you can plan, but it doesn't always work out that way. So just be prepared, and this is something that the trail will definitely teach you. You have to adjust on the fly. And because you have to adjust on the fly, you do, and you become a problem solver yourself. Something breaks, you get it mended. And never ever be afraid to ask anybody around you for help, and they'll all offer help. There'll be nobody out there who will be upset with you or annoyed with you. If you're struggling for some reason, ask for help and they will always give it to you. I've never known anybody to be shitty with somebody because, you know, they wouldn't give help. So when someone needs help, they will be given to you. And my earliest lesson was, when you do stupid stuff, and all of us do, you all make mistakes, don't do that again, because that's a stupid thing to do. So you learn by these mistakes. Having made them repeatedly, I could not find a flat spot for the first 2 months I was on the trail. And, you know, eventually I worked out that was quite important in terms of me getting to sleep. And so getting a flat spot is important when you get to camp and so on. But once again, you have to adapt. And if you don't like where you are, where you're situated, just move your tent, different place, and then set up again. I twice set up 3 times at the same campsite because I could not find anywhere I could possibly sleep. You all know that the most important thing, and this came out earlier on in terms of physicality, starting slow is of the one piece of advice I would always give anybody hiking the Appalachian Trail. Starting slow is critical to your success, in my view. It allows you to get into that rhythm of the hike, and the rhythm of the hike is something you just wake up one morning knowing what you're doing, and you get out of your tent, and the things that you expect to be in certain places in your tent are there, and they go into the right place in your bag, and you pack your bag in the right order, and you're ready to go. And you are then in the rhythm of the hike. And you will know when it hits you, and it's a wonderful feeling to have. We talked about water last night, so I won't do that. One of the subjects that came up in this particular section was zeros and Neros. You all know what zeros are, I presume, when you take no hiking days. Do you know what a Nero is? Well, yeah, it's funny enough. I always imagined Nero being 2 or 3 miles and then get into camp and stay there, get into town, stay there the rest of the day. The guy was telling me on one of my interviews recently that for him, a Nero was a 25-mile day. He'd hike 25 miles, go into town, get something, and go straight back out again. So, you know, I think people's definitions of what a Nero is kind of varies all the time. And unlike, I suspect, the PCT, and Clay will probably talk about the PCT later, but unlike the PCT, however whatever difficulty you may get into on the trail, it's just such an accessible trail that, I mean, you don't cross the road every 5 minutes, but you are crossing roads relatively regularly. So if anything happens to you, there are two things to remember. One, you can get off relatively quickly. The second, if you fall over and you are badly injured, there will be somebody coming along behind you shortly afterwards. I mean, people say this trail is crowded. There are times when you can walk all day long and not have anybody pass you, and you won't pass anybody. And yet there are still thousands of people on the trail. They're around you. They're not necessarily with you at the time. So you're never alone. You will always have somebody coming up behind you, and you will always get help to get out there.
One of the things I was thinking of, and this all goes along with stuff happens, there's something out there called trail magic. And your traditional trail magic is somebody's at the road. These days it seems like huge hiker feeds. Or it could be somebody as easily as handing you a soda and a bag of chips. But for me, the true trail magic has been just when you thought you were never going to find a Band-Aid, or just when you thought you weren't going to get a ride when you needed one, something would happen. And the best trail magic I ever had was in 2014. I was getting ready to go southbound up Mount Moosilauke. Beautiful, gorgeous day. Was not a cloud in the sky. We were all excited. And just randomly, I stepped up on a rock and fell backwards on a tree and dislocated my shoulder. And literally not 10 minutes later, coming down the trail, was an emergency room nurse who was just going to summit Moosilauke that morning. And he popped my shoulder back in. Now that's trail magic. Some of the best form of trail magic is not a hiker feed. It's not, somebody handing you a bag of chips. And
That's pretty cool, though.
It is cool. It is cool. It's all cool. But to me, that trail magic is when you think, God, I lost my sock. I only have one sock now, or, I lost my favorite bandana. Somebody will come along and hand you your bandana who was hiking, behind you or the other way. And each one of us probably have a story about that style of trail magic, and stuff happens. You're going to lose things. You'll wake up in the morning and you'll be a northbounder, and next thing you know, you're hiking south on the trail. And somebody will say, or you'll realize, somebody will turn you around. Hey, listen, maybe you went to the shelter at night and forgot which way you were going on the trail. I know we've all done that.
2 miles south once.
So even little things like that happen. And, maybe you get a bee sting and you don't have anything in your first aid for a bee sting. Somebody will come along to have stuff that you need, or a route to get you off the trail. And that's really what I wanted to add, is that there is all forms of magic out there when stuff happens.
Well, that almost goes over to the trail providers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was up at Carver's Gap, which is near Roan Mountain, by Roan Mountain, partly on the way down from Roan Mountain, and I got lost anyway, and had to get a lift down the mountain. And this young couple were apparently counting the red squirrels on Roan Mountain. So they went up and counted a bunch of squirrels and came back down again. And they gave me a lift down all the way down the mountain, down to the town of Roan Mountain. And I saw some friends of mine I've been hiking with. Said, "Oh, great. Hi, how are you?" Jumped out the car, took my pack and left my poles in there. They were beautiful black diamond poles, cork handles, absolutely perfect. So I had no poles, and I can't hike with poles. There was nowhere there to get any gear. I went along to the hostel that night, and I met a guy whose injury had got to him that day. And so he decided he was going to stop hiking. And he had black diamond cork poles, exactly what I had. I said, "Can I take your poles to Katahdin for you?" And he said, "Yeah." So he gave me his poles. So that's something that I would never have had happen to me, other than you find when the time you need something the most is when it just comes along, and you're not necessarily looking for it, but you'd love it to be there, and someone does a kindness to you or speaks to you in a way that makes you feel good and enhances your hike. So look out for those things all the time, because they will happen. Pardon you, talk about, you must have had plenty of things happen to you.
Yeah.
Wow. You're opening the door of stuff happens? What are our parameters?
There aren't any.
Whew.
Things happening to you on the trail for good reason and bad reason.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about Miss Janet. Y'all heard about Miss Janet? So she's trail angel extraordinaire on this trail here, the AT. And I had heard about her and heard about her. I never met her. I was sort of ahead of the bubble, but I took time off and this and that, and then I flip-flopped, so I finished southbound. And I don't know if she's magic or what. She sort of personifies magic. I mean that almost literally, even though I don't believe in magic. So I was coming down into, I can't remember what it's called, the Notch, where you come down into the town of, good God, what's that? No. It's is it Chester? Anyway, so I was coming down wherever Moose Lock is, where you go out. So whatever that town is, Lincoln?
Lincoln.
Yeah, Lincoln. And I was just having a hard time because Maine is hard, and New Hampshire's hard and all that stuff. I don't remember where I was, and I had made up my mind to skip the Kinsmans. So it's this 17-mile stretch. It didn't seem very extraordinary to me. I was just like, I'm tired. My body's hurting. Whatever. Nobody's going to know. I'm just going to skip it. And so I got down to the parking lot down there, and I stood out on the road and stuck my thumb out for a while. Nothing. Nobody even looked at me. So then I called the hostel down there. There's that nice one, the Barn or whatever it's called. And like, oh, you will not find a place to stay in this town this weekend because the Scottish Highlands Festival's here. I'm like, oh, man. And when I was walking down to the parking lot, this guy cruising by is like, hey, Miss Janet's around. And he just randomly gave me her phone number. So I stuck Miss Janet's phone number in there. So I was standing there feeling very discouraged. No place to stay. I just was tired. I didn't want to do, I sure didn't want to camp. And I just called Miss Janet and I said, hey, I'm up here. Which notch is it? It's not Pinkham, but anyway, it's one of the dang notches. And standing there, I said, hey, you wouldn't happen to be around. Would you mind giving me a ride? And she said, yeah, I'm in the parking lot right now. And she said, turn around. So I turned around. And there was her van up behind me, and she was videoing people dancing. I don't know what that was about. So she does that sort of thing. And then I was her only passenger going down into town. And I said, yeah, I got no place to stay. Did not mention that I was planning to skip the Kinsmans. Did not really even mention that I was burned out and tired and everything. I think you come off Old Blue to get there. It's really steep. So we're just driving into town, and I'm not making this up, just out of the blue. First of all, she said, yeah, don't worry about a place to stay. I'm going to take you to a place it's at Chet's house. And it's just this guy. And he has people stay there for free. I'd never heard of it. It's not in the AT guide. I don't think it's on, I don't even know if it's on Guthook. But so I'm like, that's good. And then out of the blue, she said, you know what you need to do, honey? She's like this big matronly person. You know what you need to do? I'm going to help you slack pack the Kinsmans. And I looked at her and I said, why did you even bring that up? She said, I can just tell. I can just tell that you need a break. You needed this. I'm like, really? Is it that obvious? And I told her the next day. So she did that for me. She took me to Chet's. I insulted Chet because I didn't know who Chet was. But anyway, that's okay. He let me stay there anyway. So she hauled me up. I slacked the Kinsmans. I did great. I didn't have my pack. I felt really good. Popped back out. She gave me a ride back into town. And I told her that next day. I said, I came off that mountain absolutely thinking I'm just skipping this next section, whatever. Nobody's going to know. And she's like, Well, I didn't exactly know that you were going to skip, but I could tell there was something. And I don't know, she is like ESP. And then the next morning, and this girl and I that I had met, she took us to the backside of Moosalak in the rain and had us go up there. And I like to tell that story just because that person in particular, Miss Janet, but other people also do actually seem not just to sort of appear when you need them, but to have exactly what you need, whether it's a sock or whatever. And I'm still blown away to this day. I don't know why she knew, but she knew I planned to do it. And when I told her, she said, "Yeah, you didn't want to do that. I could tell, you were tired," and she just gave me that idea. So that's a nice and good thing. And I'll just tell you a ridiculous thing that happened to me on the PCT last year, because they still happen. I've done however many miles now, and they still happen. I was in Washington. I was planning to swim in this lake because I had swum in one in the morning. And I got there, and it was full of ice. I'm like, oh, that's weird, but I thought I'd take a picture. And there's a nice hill right up top of the lake. Took out my pack. I've been flying my rain fly off to get it dry. And I said, I better take a picture of the ice. I'm not going to swim in there now. Well, here's a rule. You can write this one down, John. If you're standing on a steep hill and you take your pack off, make sure that you are between your pack and whatever the downhill slide is. So as I was taking the picture, my pack just tipped off my leg and started rolling down the hill. And I started running. Thank God, whatever little clump tripped me, because I would have broken my neck. And I mean a steep hill, really steep. And my pack just tumbled down 50 feet, spewing everything I owned across the hillside. It got to the bottom, and there was still some stuff that had popped out into the water, and part of my food started to just float away. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I did get tripped. I took off running just out of instinct, and really I'm glad I tripped, because if I'd have kept running, I would have really hurt myself. But the nice thing about it is, after a certain amount of time, I don't yell about it anymore. I don't cuss. I don't shake my fist at the sky. And I do think that that's a matter of sort of maturity, or just having done enough miles. This is a ridiculous, stupid thing that I shouldn't have done, and I know better, but it sort of was okay. So I slipped down this hill. I gathered everything up. I waded out into the icy water and took those bags of food that had gone out to sea, and everything was fine. Everything was fine. My pack, the straps I'd had to safety pin them back on, they didn't break. So I guess I tell that story to say that bad things happen. They are going to happen. Whatever it is, it's going to happen. But I think the more equanimity you can have, and I've gained more just the more experience I have, just knowing that whatever the bad thing is, it's going to pass. Whatever the good thing is, it's going to pass. Nothing is permanent. It's all just going to come and go. It's just experience. So I can't believe I let that happen, but I feel good about that whole incident, just because I've learned to not freak out. I've learned to not freak out. And it was one of 3 dumb mistakes I made on the PCT, and that was all in 2,600 miles, so not too bad.
Yeah. You mentioned slackpacking. You guys know what slackpacking is, I presume, do you? Yeah. And a lot of the so-called purists absolutely sniff at it, think you shouldn't slackpack at all. You should take every opportunity you've got. It's your walk. And the slackpack is merely you're carrying on your back what you need for that day. If you happen to be going back to the hostel you stayed the night before, you do not need your tent, because you're not going to be using it that night. So be prepared to slackpack as much as you possibly can, frankly, because you'll get tired. You'll get bad weather, and a slack will just re-energize you. It'll get you going again. Are you worried about slackpacking, or would you not do it?
Right now, I'm not planning on slack.
No, nobody ever. I don't think anybody ever does. Yeah.
Depends on how I am.
Yeah, I think you'll find there are days when you look at the terrain coming up, and you might think, you know what, I far wish to be going from north to south on this particular one, and it's sometimes worth doing, because at the end of the day, your job is to get 2,200 miles completed from beginning to end. It doesn't really matter which order you do it in.
Apropos of purism, do we know what that is? Does everybody know what that is? So this is basically people who say, I'm going to walk every single step of the Appalachian Trail. I'm going to pass every single blaze. If I go off on a Blue Blaze that has another way out, I have to come back out the same way so that I'm not missing that 50 feet of trail. If I get dropped off on this side of the road and then I get dropped off when I go back from town on the other side, I got to walk back across and then walk. So this is purism. Here's what I want to say about purism. It's fine. You want to do purism, that's great. A, it doesn't make you any better than anybody else. B, it is the only true way to hike every step of the Appalachian Trail. So it's true. That's the only way. If you skip 50 feet, you skip 50 feet, but I don't care. C, this is the only trail that you're going to be able to do that on. So people who do the AT and they're like, oh, I was a Pierce and I touched every dadgum. That's fine. You cannot do it on the PCT unless you want to drive yourself insane and bore yourself to death or be dangerous, because on the PCT, you will be walking through snow and you can't unless you want to follow gut hook and through the snow and wander through. No, you're not going to do it. You are going to glissade. You're going to cross cut across the snow to, the CDT is even more ridiculous because it's barely signed in a lot of places. So purism is fine. I think it's great. I admire people who do it once. But I think people who do it on the AT, some people get their nose in the air. There's no other trail on earth where you can do that. So if that's your thing, awesome. You don't get a merit badge for it. That's really cool. You will not be able to do it on any of these other big trails anywhere in the world, really. It just doesn't happen. So I'm not a fan of purism, but you can tell I just sort of roll my eyes at it. It's a little bit of, I don't know. Why do we need these hierarchies out here? I agree. I mean, people say, well, what if you skip 50 miles? Is that okay? I don't know. You get to hike your own hike. So it's true. The only way to do it is to walk absolutely every step, but almost nobody does it. And you do that, you can draw your own merit badge, but otherwise it's not that big a deal.
And people get twisted up on that. They get twisted up on where you sleep at night. Oh, you're going to a hostel again? And people get twisted up on people judge people's packs. It's weird. Not many people do, but there are people that do.
In the early days, your judgmental gene will come out, and you may say, well, they're not doing this right, they're not doing that right. But you'll soon get over that, because we're all in the same boat together. We're all having bad days sometimes, we're all having good days sometimes. And because we see it in other people as well. And what happens is nearly everybody becomes empathetic towards everybody else, and they will look out for everybody else. I know I was hiking with a bunch of women, a bunch of guys, and one of the guys was being relatively inappropriate with one or two of the women. And some of the girls told me this, so I had to have a word with the guy. And I wasn't going to at first. Then I thought, sorry, I've got to say something. I can't not say anything. I said, they don't like the way you're looking at them, which is a bit of a stupid thing for an old guy to say to a young guy, I guess. And he said, I'm just trying to be friends. I said, well, stop it, because they don't like it. And I think you'll find that if any of you get in any difficulties out there, there will be somebody else out there who will stand up for you and help you out. You're a big guy. You can look after yourself, I'm sure. But there'll be people out there who will give you help, and you won't expect it necessarily, and you will seek that help sometimes, because you're going to have bad days and you need to learn how to resolve some of those problems. You can sit in your tent thinking, what am I going to do next? The person in the tent next to you may be thinking exactly the same, but the two of you together might be able to work it out. And you'll find yourself forming alliances on the trail out there and working out what needs to be worked out. And that becomes quite an important part of your hike sometimes, because you soon realise, I know you've got support at home and everyone's got support somewhere, but you soon realise you'll get help from sources you're not expecting to get them from. Miss Janet was a good example for you, obviously. And it just happens that someone will come along at the right time for you and will help your hike. And never turn that down, because it's always a valuable thing to have.
By and large, the community is unbelievably supportive, kind, friendly, non-judgmental. I mean, like overwhelmingly better than in the real world. And I mean, to me, that's one of the appeals of this. It's been mentioned by people that the comparisons and the judgments tend to fall away. I've seen an 18-year-old girl hike with two 30-something people, and she was so sad when she got separated from him that her mom picked her up and took her back to be with her 38-year-old friend. I hiked with my 19-year-old cousin when I was 54. You will see odd couples. Nobody cares. Often we don't know what anyone's politics are, what their religious beliefs are. You might find out. Those guys I hiked with in Virginia, we didn't agree on everything, but it just doesn't matter. I liken it to boot camp. We're all doing something very hard. We're all pulling in the same direction. And really, truly, I mean, often not people who don't know this, especially with women, will be like, you bringing a gun, or you going to be safe, or you going with somebody? It's safe. It's unbelievably safe. Statistically, I've done the math for a story in the Trek. So much safer than any town, any college campus that you can be on in this country. So overall, you may hear us carping about this behavior or that behavior, but really, really the truth is it's unbelievably supportive. I find that to be one of the charming and most excellent things about this whole world.
Yeah. So you guys who are actually going, are there things...
Yes, sir. It's not going to be my risk, it will be hers, but a fear of mine is lightning.
Yeah.
You're up on,
Yeah, and
you're up on
that exists.
terra firma, solid rock.
Yeah.
You're up.
I've been told just to crouch down.
Yeah.
Get out if you can, but otherwise just to crouch down as low as possible to the ground. And I mean, in my case, I was in lightning just once in the Smokies. It was terrifying, but I actually carried on hiking. I was surrounded by trees. I mean, the chances are still relatively remote. I didn't wave my poles in the air, to be fair. I was somewhat reluctant to do that, but I think I put my poles away. But you are subject to what's around you anyway. And lightning, apparently the answer is to duck down, touch the, just get down as far as you can, down on all fours, and just wait it out. Or get under cover somewhere. If you can find a shelter, obviously that will be fine. But the odds of being struck by lightning are remote. And having said that, a guy I hiked with in 2014 was struck by lightning, and it burnt his hand. That's all it did to him. So in the White Mountains, you're very exposed. Most of the time we're in the trees, and you do see trees down and so on. I've never known anybody have a tree fall on their tent or anything like that. It's happened, obviously, in the past, but generally, my experience was it wasn't something I saw a great deal of. I normally try to make sure I was undercover somewhere, and if I saw it was coming, because obviously we know what the weather forecast or radar is all around us, you can get into some sort of safety. The problem is going to be when you go to somewhere like Franconia Ridge, which is this long ridge, and you are exposed. There's no question about it. You're above the tree line. And I would just say that if the forecast for that day is crappy weather, don't go over it. Wait a day and then go over it the next day when it's often going to be beautiful. And to see Franconia Ridge on a sunny day is one of the finest sights I've ever seen in my life. So I would think that's probably worth thinking about, Just like in everyday life, just be aware of what's going on around you. The storm is coming in, then you need to prepare for that storm that's coming in. I mean, we had one obviously down in Florida recently and put shutters up because I knew the storm was coming. We were okay. And it frightens me, I must admit. The thought of lightning frightens me, but I never felt it was struck close enough to me at all. I never heard any trees falling around me. And that's part of the whole thing. The worst thing for me, worse than lightning, would be 4 or 5 days of rain, because it becomes relentless. And there's just nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do is either go on through it or decide to stop. Don't put yourself through 4 or 5 days of purgatory if it's such anathema to you that this rain is on you all the time. Just get out of it for a few days and you'll start feeling better. And it clears most weather clears stuff out. So you then go out and it's sunny the next day, and you'll find to keep going.
I have a little specialty. I'm not a statistician, but I did take a statistics course in college. I love statistics. I'm just fascinated by it. And a little specialty I have with the Trek, the Trek.co. It's a long distance hiking website, is to look statistically at common fears and different things. And I often advise this for people, like whatever you think you're afraid of on the trail, go and look up the statistics on it. And with lightning and bears and things like that, and human violence, obviously the chance is non-zero, so you can think about it. But to me, it's really not worth thinking about. And then I'll tell you a quick story. I met these CDT hikers on my first hike on the Colorado Trail, and we were waiting out a storm in Breckenridge, Colorado. And they were just talking to me. By now, they're grizzled CDT veterans, and they had both done the PCT, and one guy had done the AT as well. And they're like, I don't even worry about lightning. You're up above 10,000 feet on most of the CDT, 11, 12,000 feet through Colorado, almost the whole time. They just don't even stop. They don't worry about it. That sounds reckless and crazy, but if you look statistically, so when I was on the CDT this summer, you know what? I walked through lightning storms, and it did get super intense at one point, but I really crouched down more to keep out of the hail. I'm not saying tempt fate, but really, really, if you look statistically, it's just so uncommon. We as humans, I love this stuff. There's actually some good writers who've written books about this. We tend to fear things that we probably shouldn't, like sharks and bears and lightning and murder and airplane crashes. And like I always say, especially on the AT, I've mentioned it today, you should be a lot more afraid of norovirus and ticks and things like that, in my opinion. So I'm not trying to be cavalier, but particularly for people at home. And by the way, I have a great book for you, Bruce, and anybody who has a person at home, written by Juliana Chauncey. She's part of the Backpacker Radio podcast. It's called Hiking from Home. And it's a really good book to help your person at home understand what you are doing. It's also sneaky through the back door, a really great book for you if you're doing your first through hike, because it kind of goes through almost everything. But that will help ease your fear, I think, just to have an understanding of, yeah, lightning's possible, but it's so rare and so unlikely that spend your time helping Betty, or is it Betsy? Betty. Helping Betty treat her clothes with permethrin to keep the ticks away. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be a condescending at all, but I really do think that's a good way to look at it.
How do you feel about being the one at home? Are you going to be worrying about it all the time? What's your thing? All right, there you go. There you go.
No,
because she knows what she's doing.
she was talking about her Garmin that she used when she did the Monadnock Sunapee Trail, and also a portion of the Long Trail where it reported to my computer where she was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just stuff had just been unheard of 30 years ago. And I could also tell how fast, how much ground she was covering in miles per hour.
Sure.
And it only would, I'd say, oh, she's doing 3.2 miles an hour, things must be going well. Then there was one point where she wasn't reporting at all, but that was because this was in July. It was just a really dense foliage.
Yep.
And it just wasn't picking up the signal.
I'd love to jump in on that, because this is another bugaboo of mine. How many of you that are going to do it, do you have a spot tracker or you have a Garmin? Probably most of you, right? So get used to it a little bit and tell your person at home. I think it's a problem, because if you have that thing, it can raise the expectation. Aha. And my wife likes to be able to text me no matter where I am. So we sign up and we pay the subscription so you can do that. And we still got into trouble when I was in the Gila wilderness in New Mexico. Absolutely make a plan to let them know how long you should be out of touch before they even start thinking about contacting search and rescue. Because people get used to it, like, oh, I hear from them every day. Foliage, I actually again, a story for the trek, I actually called Garmin because we had this weird problem. And they explained to me that the way their satellites go, it's east-west, and then I was in a canyon that was going north-south. So you have this much space to catch that, and it just doesn't work as well. I was getting garbled pieces of messages from my wife 8 days late, and they would come in pieces out of order. So I just say it's a nice tool. Do not absolutely rely on it. And those of you, read up on it, but if you have people at home, just say, don't expect, if you don't hear from me one night, don't worry. You know, come up with a plan, 72 hours or whatever before somebody panics, because it can cause actual people to call search and rescue, and you don't want that.
Manage expectations.
Yeah, and it's just those devices, they seem so awesome, but they're not fully reliable. It's not their fault, but.
So have you guys got things that you think that might happen that you've been concerned about?
I do.
Yeah.
Slackpacking. Reliable. I mean, I worry that leaving my stuff with someone that might show up to pick me up.
They're reliable, especially if you use a hostel.
And usually you're hiking back to the place.
So they're getting your money for a second night.
So typically, like I stayed at a hostel outside of Gorham, New Hampshire, and then left my stuff, and they shuttled me around to pick 'em notch, and then I hiked 21 miles back to the hostel. So I was flipping my.
Yeah, typical rule of thumb is hike to your stuff. Never hike away from. So even some people like key swap. A lot of section hikers are key swap and leave their car. Leave your car or your gear where you're going to finish. That's the rule of thumb.
Yeah, because you're that's what you're doing. You're going back home to your stuff. Yeah. Yeah. It's worth doing. It's absolutely worth
And they
doing.
could still rifle through your pack and steal your stuff, but they don't. These hostels, if they lost their reputation, they'd lose everything. So I found everybody eminently trustworthy on this and other trails.
I would rely on the hostels for that versus.
Some random shuttle person. Yeah, I agree with that.
And shuttles, I don't know how comfortable you all are with hitchhiking. It can be iffy from time to time, but it's something you can do. But there are so many shuttle drivers around these days, aren't they? And you'll see those in Far Out. You can just call those people, and they're pretty reliable turning up and meeting you. So you can get around the trail, way off the trail pretty quickly. What was that?
I was just piggybacking on. If they're in Far Out, they're trustable. But when in doubt, utilize the resources of the hostels. Because like with the example of Woods Hole here, Neville's going to communicate with Julie at Weary Feet. Neville's going to communicate with the owner of Angel's Rest. Neville's going to communicate with Tina over at Quarterway Inn. And the hostel owners, they have a network. So when you get if you utilize service, say you're out and all you remember is Neville's number. Well, Neville's going to know somebody in that zone who is closer to you than maybe here. So I always say utilize the hostels and the numbers in Far Out. And it seems strange to like the outside of the hiking world that would all be trustable, just leave your gear somewhere. But it works. It's a system.
I never worried about anything being stolen. If I went into town sometimes and they wouldn't allow me to take my pack in, I just put it down outside and it was never a problem at all.
I do know one person in 2016 who had her whole pack stolen outside of a place in New. So it can happen, but I do the same thing as Mighty Blue. I just sort of trust. Yeah. Any of you Lord of the Rings fans? Do you remember when Sam and Frodo were in Mordor and Sam keeps having to leave Frodo asleep to go find water and stuff, and he's like, well, I'm just going to trust. That's the way I think of it. I'm in Mordor. I am just trusting.
What about thoughts you've had in terms of things that stuff happens? Are you going to do you think you'll be able to adapt your plans and so on?
No. I think I overcame my bigger concerns. I know stuff's going to happen. There's no doubt about that. But my bigger concerns were I don't like being cold and wet. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. And then the other one is I have this fear of snakes. Mm-hmm. Well, the cold and wet, I'm going to have to deal with it. The fear of snakes, I just, if I see one, I know whether they're poisonous or not, and I force myself actually to pick them up.
Oh my God!
So that I can get over that fear. so I'll do that just to help me with that fear, and it works because recently I've seen some snakes and I haven't gotten that shock that I've gotten other years.
Take your pole and pick them up, or like?
No, reach down and pick it up. If it's a garter snake or a black snake or something like that, I'll just reach them out and grab them because.
You're not picking up the rattlers.
No, I'm not going to pick a rattler up. No, I'm not.
You're a snake handler, aren't you?
No, I'm not doing that. I'll
You speak in tongues while you do that.
Funny enough, and I kind of said this earlier on, that it is a privilege to see these animals. I know I was scared of snakes, but it's still, they're compelling to look at as well. Once you've seen them, it's when they dart out a bit, which is not very nice. But once you've seen them, you're okay with them, and you think, this is magnificent. See a moose. I walked up behind a moose. I'm a tall guy. The back of this moose was higher than my head. It was massive. And I should have been frightened, but I was just fascinated by it, just looking at it, and I was filming it and so on. And someone said, you really shouldn't get quite as close as that, because when they charge, they can be quite violent. But apparently what you have to do is just stand behind a tree. They can't turn terribly well.
And people are afraid of bears, and I grew up in an area where they're all over the place.
Oh,
man. And I was like, they're like, to me, it's like they're trash pan. They're like a raccoon. It's just they're big raccoons. It's all they are. I'm more concerned about the raccoon getting into my pack than I am about the bear sniffing around.
Some people I know they said 40 bears. How many did you see?
I only saw 9 first time, only 1 second time.
I saw 7, and then on my section hikes, I've seen 4 more on the AT. So it's a great privilege. As far as snakes go, rattlers are very, very courteous creatures because they let you know, which is pretty awesome. You are quite likely to see them in the rocks in Pennsylvania and all the way up and down the trail. And then I did step over a copperhead. He didn't strike or anything. And here's the word of comfort I have for copperheads. They are the most common venomous snake bite in the United States. They are the least serious venomous snake bite in the United States. So it's not going to be a fun experience, but it's not going to kill you, and it's not going to be a big disaster. So I just like to see every animal except fleas, ticks, and sometimes hornets. I had bad experiences with hornets on the AT, and I don't know what to tell you about that. Little bastards.
On the AT, you'll see notes.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody will post a note
Yeah.
on the tree, hornet's nest, 5 feet up to the
Oh my gosh, and especially late summer and fall. I don't know what their problem is, but they hate us.
Yeah.
Dang. Oh my gosh.
Somebody said earlier, I don't know if it must have been this morning, that if you smell cucumber, who said that? What kind of snake is it?
I think it's a copperhead.
Okay, if you smell cucumber, I'd never heard that before.
They're so handsome. They're such pretty creatures to look at, but
Where are the black flies? Is that?
Maine, supposedly. I never saw one.
I never saw one either.
This was not a bad year for.
Oh, really?
I will say, as a practical matter, I'm thrilled to have my 1 ounce head net, bug net, and on every trail, not on the CDT this year, but there's just some point at which I use that thing. In Connecticut, I don't know what the problem was, but there were those big things that burrow down in your hair. They're like horse flies or whatever. Wow. Yeah. So that's a worthwhile ounce to spend, I think. I like having that thing a lot. Yeah, oh my gosh. Well, if you're an early bird, you're going to be, yeah, you'll get the nickname Spidey or, whatever. And it is, yeah, and I am often that person, and it's irritating. But I have a bandana right here all the time, no matter what. Every time I hit one, I just go, just wipe it off.
And leave messages in the registers. I must admit that was a pretty good way of communicating with people up and down the trail. They are. Yeah, you should always definitely use some stuff on your hands afterwards. Yeah, picking that pen up is. Oh.
Search and rescue actually do make use of those when they have that information. So when Inchworm disappeared, that was partly how they figured out where this person got off trail and unfortunately died a few years ago. And I read the book. The guy sort of put the whole case back together and published a book about it. That was helpful to them. So even there are people who are like, I don't want the government to know where I am. Well, whatever, man. You're carrying a phone. They're gonna find you. It's actually advisable when you come to a register at a wilderness area or any register like we did, those of us who went out last night, put your name in there. Because if you go missing, they'll check all those. And they do recommend that, search and rescue people.
Now, on the other hand, as a woman hiker, solo hiker, it's been suggested to me not to sign those, so nobody knows where you're at.
I disagree. I disagree with that because that's such a tiny, tiny risk. I mean, statistically, and here's the thing, have a trail name, don't put, I'm Nancy wearing frilly pink bows in my hair, just, I'm stink pot, whatever it is. It's such an unusual thing that somebody's coming from off trail. It does happen. There are those horrible, horrible cases, but it's such an effort. They have somebody who's really wanting to prey on women. They can go to town and it's much easier. So all I know is that Search and Rescue does recommend that you do that. Try to sign in where you can and disguise yourself. And by all means, if you have any suspicion, hike the other way. Find a person. It's quite rare.
You literally have to walk up to somebody and say, look, I'm uncomfortable here. Can you hike with me or something like that? And they will do so.
And that's
It
happened.
won't be a problem at all.
Yeah, I've done that for people.
Yeah, so have I actually.
But yeah, it's remarkably safe and statistically way safer than anywhere that any of us live, for real. Like in terms of how likely are you to be murdered? I've done those statistics, so it's a little tricky, but.
You put your statistical degree into.
Well, I just think numbers are fascinating, and.
So what are other things that things you do expect or don't expect to happen? Could we give you some help on some of that? Or are you just comfortable that you're just going to walk and it'll be fine?
Here's a little bitty thing. The AT is incredibly well marked. So, I still think you should carry a paper guidebook of some kind. The AT guide is fantastic. It's really smartly done. I noticed they do it in ink. They do it colored ink now.
Yeah, they do.
And go look at that one. It's really amazing. I recommend you bring that as well as what I still call gut hook far out. Because you don't know. I killed my phone in a rainstorm on the Colorado Trail. But here's the thing. Unless you are Superman, you're going to wander off trail sometime. Because you're just cruising along and you're just thinking, you're singing a song or looking at the birds and you're just going to not be looking for blazes. And suddenly you wake up and go, oh, I haven't seen a blaze in a while. So expect that. And don't freak out about it. Don't panic about it. You can retrace your steps usually pretty easy. But I was surprised, it's so, they just have these white blazes everywhere, not in.
And you're looking, to be fair, you are looking down a lot.
Yeah.
There's no question. You're hiking along, you're looking down. I've gone down the entire wrong side of a mountain once, which was a nightmare. Because when I retraced my steps, I should have gone up that way. And that's what happened.
It's embarrassing, but it's possible to get turned around. What is that thing, the Stairway to Heaven or whatever up in New Jersey or something? And I got up at the top and there's this spaghetti of trails and I started going down again. I'm like, wait a minute.
That's where I got lost.
Yeah, I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't get very far down there, but also, I know it's old school, but I think it's a good idea to have a compass. I think it's not, you're not probably going to carry maps on the AT. If you do the PCT or the CDT, you should carry maps. You really should, and you should have a compass, and you should know how to use it, in my opinion.
So as far as the guides, there's the AWOL guide and there's the AT guide. Which is there a preference? They're the same thing?
I think AWOL is more informative, and I think it's easier to use. If you go look at the ones that are in there, it's just really cleverly designed. AWOL did it. It's an amazing document.
Well, the AWOL is called the AT guide. Are you talking about the one by the ATC? Yeah. Okay, that is different than AWOL.
Yeah, the one by the ATC is the Thru Hiker's Companion.
Yeah. And it's fine.
That's what I use both times.
So I use the AWOL guide.
AWOL is pretty fun. Man, it's handy. Go take a look at. Oh, you have it, yeah.
So then, did you guys typically break them apart?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you didn't take the whole book.
I took my whole book. I still got my whole book. I made a shadow box and got it in there, with it.
Actually, I tore pages out, but I did keep them all. So sometimes I mailed them home or whatever,
And you
just
can get
as
it
a
unbound.
souvenir. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get it one unbound, north or south.
And you can get it. You also get it on your phone as well.
But again, it is possible to screw up your phone. And look, on the AT, you have to be not all that competent to get lost on the AT. You will get off track at least a few times, but it's easy to find your way back.
By the way, that is absolutely the best thing about Far Out, because you can literally see where you are, and you can turn in the direction, and you will hit the trail if you go that way. So that's a really reassuring thing to have. I mean, I got lost loads of times. Yeah. And he's right. You're only an idiot will get lost a lot. I got lost quite a lot. And because I wasn't paying attention, I was talking or I was singing, and I was looking down at my feet, and suddenly I got lost. But the great thing is, I'm not where I should be. And I don't know whether you heard earlier this year when I was hiking the West Highland Way. I had Far Out on my phone on the West Highland Way. I got lost by 2 darn miles, 2 miles out of my way. Took the completely wrong path. And fortunately, I hitched a lift to get back to the path. So I wasted about an hour and a half of my time. But the great thing is, if you think you're not quite sure where the next blaze is, just go back. But there are places, certainly. I'm trying to think where it is. There are certain places you go a long time sometimes without seeing a blaze. It's probably because the trail is so obvious. You would carry on down that path and so on. But I started to get slightly nervous when I couldn't see a blaze for a while.
Well, isn't it the whites where there aren't blazes? Is that right? So you just have to they have cairns and stuff. The smoky. So I guess in certain areas they're not allowed to.
Yeah, but it's exactly that's part of it as well. But then you suddenly see a blaze and you think, oh my, thank God, it's a real reassuring thing that the blaze is there for you. But you needn't worry about it, because Far Out will take you straight back to the trail if you look at your phone and you think you're lost.
I do know a lady that was part of my trail family. She got lost and ended up going almost 5 miles down the wrong trail. But it was right there where the AT and the long trail, because the long trail is blazed white as well. So she was still seeing white blazes, but she had the AT guide and was expecting a shelter to come up. Well, that shelter didn't come up, and that's when she put it together that she had went down the wrong trail.
But really, don't worry about any of that, because it's not too big an issue, and you'll be.
It's tough to get truly lost on the AT. It happens, but rarely.
Well, the beauty about the AT, you turn around. I always start looking for, if I'm going north, I turn around and start looking for the southbound blazes, because it's marked just as well. And that's a good feeling too when you turn around and you go, okay, I'm where I'm supposed to be, because you saw that southbound blaze. Does everybody know what the double blazes mean, and if one's up to the right or up to the left or on top of each other? Yeah, indicate might be a turn to the right or a turn to the left, or if supposedly, now sometimes they're a little tricky, if they're right on top of each other, that means, stay straight ahead, but it might appear that it's going to veer off, when in actuality, you're supposed to veer off. So that's when you just double check, yeah. Because I think sometimes when the trail maintaining clubs do that double blaze sitting right on top of each other might mean a turn for the Eastman Trail Club in Tennessee, but when you're up in New Jersey, it might mean, look ahead, yeah.
It's not consistent.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get lost on the AT. I've certainly gotten off course, but you can usually get your way back. So, but Inchworm, she must have had navigational difficulties in her brain. I don't know. This is a lady who had been hiking the trail, and she was all the way up in Maine, and she went off to use to dig a cat hole, as I like to say, and she never found her way back. And search and rescue. The rule is sort of, if you're lost, stop, stay, they'll find you. That's a good rule until a few days have gone by, and then it's time to go to a mountaintop to get some cell phone service, or be smart enough to find a creek drainage to get down to a road. We are in the eastern U.S. This is not huge wilderness. Not even the 100-mile wilderness is a big wilderness. You can have food delivered to you in the 100-mile wilderness. So, and it was the largest search and rescue operation ever mounted in the state of Maine, and they just couldn't find her. And then a year, 3 years later.
2.5 years later.
Yeah, and right before I hiked, so I think the fall, somebody came across her tent. She was not that far off the trail,
Half a mile.
and she just sat in her tent waiting to be rescued. And they had her journal and they had the text that she had tried to send out. So, wait for search and rescue until they don't show up, and then sometimes you do need to take charge of your own rescue.
Do all of y'all have whistles that y'all carry? Do y'all know how to use them? I mean, the proper. Yes, three short blasts, and then the person that, if somebody hears you, they respond with one long blast.
I had a whistle.
A lot of backpacks come with them now on the sternum.
I learned after about 500 miles.
I know Osprey does, and I think a couple of others do too.
The ones that come on the straps, they're kind of weak.
And it's, again, statistically, it's just like the chance that you're going to need to use that are just tiny. I've never heard anybody blow a whistle.
My last wife, she insisted that I wore a whistle around my neck on a piece of string the whole way, and I did. Even slept in the darn thing, and it was just in case something happened. So I've got this whistle dangling around my neck, and I got to Connecticut, and I was hiking along this road, and there were a bunch of scouts and their troop leader, and he was one of these pompous little chaps.
Twits.
That's the one. And he said, "We're going down the right way. We're going down." I said, "I think we should just turn up this road here, this path here." He said, "No, we're going the right way." So I walked on with him. He seemed to know what he was talking about. Then it was clear to me, he was then consulting the map and thinking, this isn't quite right. So I said, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to go back. I've got this whistle. What I think is the right way, I'll blast on it twice, just twice for I've found the right route, and you come follow me that way." He said, "Okay, we'll do that." But he was thinking to himself, silly old fool, I'm not going to follow him. So of course I go up there, and it was the right way. I went up the path. I went to blow my whistle twice, and because I'd worn it for so long, it had rusted. It went. So as far as I know, he's still walking straight because he knew exactly where he was going. So
Should be another thing. Never use a metal whistle. Always get a plastic one.
yeah, for that very good reason. I'd never tried it out, and it just didn't work. So I threw it away the next day.
Wow.
So really, there's you will find yourself faced with problems, and I actually equate it to the hike itself. You when you fall over, and I used to, as you know, I shout out the number of my fall, number 28, whatever it is, and I get up and I keep moving on because you have no alternatives. You can lie on the ground and die, stay there and die, or you can get up and keep walking. And it's the same with any problem you face. You can address it or don't address it, but there's the problem. You have to handle it because there's no one else around you to handle it. So that's what you need to do. Well, that's really the areas I think stuff happens. What about the rest of you? About anything else you want to say?
I mean, yeah, stuff does happen. Like, they've been saying good and bad. But like Mighty Blue and I was talking about when we was hiking back out of Dismal Falls today, when you get done with the trail, you're going to pretty much forget any bad that did happen, And whenever I say bad, I talk about, miserable days or anything like that, because...
You'll get home and say, "Oh, God, it didn't rain at all. It was fabulous."
Well, I think I remember after Mighty Blue and I talked about this earlier, I was sitting here trying to think of bad days. And the only and it wasn't even really a bad day, it was just a miserable day that I remembered on mine was a 36-mile hike in the rain because I had started at Peters Mountain Shelter and I saw that it was clouding up. And so I was going to wait and see. And so I waited about an hour and nothing. So I was like, well, okay, I'll just go ahead and go. And if it does start raining, I'll just go to that next shelter. So I started hiking, and sure enough, about 1.5 miles into the hike, it started raining. So I was like, okay, I'll just go to the next shelter, be a little wet, no big deal. So I got to the turnoff of the next shelter. It was about half a mile down to the shelter. So I get down there, and they've got the roof just off the shelter, getting ready to rebuild it. So I was like, oh, crap. So I turn around. Right. Yeah, exactly. So I turn around, walk a half a mile back, and then I hike, I was like, okay, I'll just go on to the next shelter. So I get to the next shelter, and I had to turn and go down the mountain. And I get down there and get to the front of the shelter, and I swear it was about 30 Boy Scouts piled up in this shelter. And I mean, there was absolutely no room. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one. Now it's starting to get dark. The next one was the 501 shelter. I actually was jogging half the way to the 501 shelter, trying to get there before it got dark. That way I didn't wake anybody. But I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, I don't care if everybody is asleep. I don't care if I got to lay in the middle of the floor. I'm not going any further. And so I ended up, getting there, and there was probably, I think, 4 people there, and I knew most of them. And I just drenched, I had to change and all that. But it ended up being a 36-mile day in the rain, and that was, I mean, that's really the worst thing that I can think of right now. But I know other stuff happened, but the good totally outweighs.
Do y'all know what type 2 fun is? Have you heard that expression? So type 1 fun is when you have fun. Type 2 fun is when it actually sucks while you're doing it, but afterwards you have this awesome story that you and your buds talk about. So it's the horrible storm or the 36 miles in the rain or the whatever, and it is fun in hindsight. While you were doing it, it was not fun. That's type 2 fun, and it's a real thing. It is.
And you'll have plenty of that.
Right, and it's like, seriously, like some of the screwiest things that happen are just a great story, and it doesn't seem so bad in hindsight, so.
I had a friend I met there. He couldn't get in the shelter because it was absolutely jam-packed, and he was determined not to tent, so he decided to sleep underneath the shelter.
There was a guy that was hiking my year that done the same thing.
Which is where all the mice are based.
And therefore I'll just...
And so he didn't need a tent, obviously, so he just slept in his sleeping bag. And he was eating trail mix, okay? So anyway, this is why he's called Chip, by the way. He's got this clearance about this much above him. He realises he's been joined in his sleeping bag by 3 or 4 mice, I think it is, this time. And so he bolts upright, smashes his face on the ceiling below, chips his tooth, has to leave the trail to go to his sister's wedding, and made a point of being in all the photographs with this chipped tooth cut up this. So he became Chip. That was it. He's a guy who got struck by lightning as well.
Don't sleep under the shelter. Also, do not set your tent or your hammock up in the shelter. I don't care if you think it's empty, because I've arrived late and somebody's got their tent set up, and you're like, come on, man, just don't do it. It's actually, it's totally not okay. It's never okay to do that, never. And I mean literally, that's like a leave. It is, it's leave no trace. You don't do that. You just don't do that. That's not what shelters are for. And it is shocking that people will do stuff like that. It's like, no, because I was end of a rainy, freezing day, and one of those shelters, I think I don't know where it was, Pennsylvania probably, where to hike 0.6 to the shelter. When I got down there were a million Boy Scouts, and they had set up their tents in the thing, and I'm like, and the Scoutmaster didn't tell them to move it or anything. And I was like, wow. Yeah, it's not, it's actually a leave no trace thing, so.
Yeah, the ATC are very much the police of this, and they're always the bad guys, aren't they? I mean, and they're trying the best to do the best for the trail. They absolutely are, but they always come across to people as offending some people on the trail, and you just have to.
Well, in this campaign they've been on for a couple of years is like grievously offending Miss Janet. Is this anti-magic campaign? We understand what they're trying to do, but I think some people feel they've gone overboard. So you heard Eagle Eye say, "Well, if we find magic, we break it up," and you're like, "Well, I don't know." Well, they are on this anti-magic deal, and I never expect magic, ever. That's why it's magic, But they have this line, they think people are expecting it, and then they get these huge hiker feeds. Well, I only got one of those ever, anywhere. So I don't think it's a big problem.
The good tip, though, is not to have a Snickers just if you're coming to a road crossing. especially early on.
Yeah.
You may very well find some food there, so enjoy it.
Yeah. It is fun. It's a nice thing. So it's their line is something like, well, it ruins the wilderness experience. And I'm like, well, that's your opinion, you know. And we're on the Appalachian Trail where you're going to cross a road every 3-4 miles and there's traffic and this and that. So it is a lovely little wilderness corridor, but let's not fool ourselves that we're in the middle of the Bob Marshall wilderness or something, you know.
I don't think any of you are, to be fair. I was expecting more of you to be more fearful about things you're going to face, but you're just going to face a fantastic adventure. And the more you open yourself up to that adventure, the more that adventure will be. You allow yourself don't try to take on the trail. Let the trail come to you, and it definitely will come to you. You know, you'll work your way through it. You'll make mistakes. You'll resolve those mistakes, and it'll become a better experience because you've resolved that mistake. And just keep doing that, and you'll get to the end. And it's a great feeling.
This is what I named my book that I wrote about the AT, and I fully believe it. You just have to let the trail show you what you need to do, and it's an amazing teacher. And I think, I think people that struggle with it and fight it and try to make, it's just like with anything in life, you're just trying to force your way to stick to your spreadsheet or do your thing. I don't know. The opportunity is there to learn from the trail and from all the people and everybody out there. And I just can't believe how much I learned from just paying attention. That's all it is. So. She's a lovely teacher too. She's not like a taskmaster beating your knuckles or anything. Every once in a while.
Yeah, she lets you fail and pick yourself back up again.
She does.
There is no recess though.
So tomorrow we're going to talk about gear. I suppose you've probably got all your gear, but we're going to go through all the tents we've got and the various different items we have and tell you our opinion. I remember last time I came here, everybody rubbished my tent. So be prepared for that. They'll rubbish my tent again tomorrow.
Why?
I don't know why. I think Bruce was very much against my tent.
I guess I remember that. That's weird. Well, you're going to hear hike your own hike, hike your own hike, hike your own hike. Anytime anybody's complaining about what you're doing, as long as you are not in their face doing something discourteous or violating leave no trace, that's their problem. You can do it exactly how you want. Somebody asked, how do you get a trail name? You're going to hear people say, well, you must be given a trail name. And I'm like, well, did the trail gods decree that? You can make up your own trail name. There is no rule out here. Again, don't be discourteous. Leave no trace is a thing, and it's serious, and it matters. But you can do this however you want. You can yellow blaze, you can aqua blaze, you can pink blaze, you can do whatever you want to do. It's your hike. Enjoy it. You're going to take, whether you're sectioning or weekending or doing a through hike. Why would you let somebody else, shame you or, dictate how you're supposed to do it? There's not a rule book. There's not a rule book. But you'll hear from people who think there is.